Hello and greetings. I'm very happy to offer you this facilitation support document to support your work as a national facilitator with the project, leveraging the development of local food crops and fishery value chains for improved nutrition and sustainable food systems in the Pacific. My name is Jessica and I hope soon to speak with you all to support in any way I can with the review of your first workshops and planning for your second workshop and preparation for the Pacific Week of Agriculture. I've prepared a facilitation checklist for you and I'm sure that you have all these points covered. However, just to frame them as values, as this is important for any multi-stakeholder process, you can see that we have inclusion, clarity, awareness, understanding, transparency, and achievement. And I look forward to talking to you about what these mean for you soon. As facilitators, you will of course be aware of your role and the qualities required to facilitate successful workshops. And I've just listed a few of my most important qualities of facilitator here. So to be a good listener, to be respectful and inclusive of your stakeholders, to remain neutral and calm in the process, to be aware of what is happening in the moment and facilitate the people first and foremost over the process itself, to be open and non-judgmental, to really cultivate the conditions for change, to be engaging and creative, to foster innovation, to be honest, curious, self-aware, and fair. Your main role is designing the process, and I hope to discuss this with you and how you found all aspects of being a facilitator on this project, because I'm sure it's also covered convening, organizing, and communication. Your stakeholders are obviously key to the successful outcomes of the process, and here are just a few reflective questions to consider your stakeholder experience and needs so far. So have you created a common language and understanding amongst your stakeholders? Are your stakeholders' expectations understood and being met? Is your process encouraging stakeholder learning? Is your process sensitive to all stakeholder knowledge, capacities, and learning styles? Are your plans and progress being communicated to all stakeholders, even those not directly involved in the process? Do you understand the ambitions and aspirations of your stakeholders? Does your process allow all voices to be heard and valued equally? Have you explored and defined stakeholder problems and opportunities within the project? Are all key stakeholders engaged in the process? People often question the need for a facilitator, so sometimes it is useful to ask them to reflect on their typical meeting experience versus a well-designed workshop with a good facilitator. I'm sure that no one is questioning the value of having you in this process, but this is just for your reference for future to really show that being a facilitator does really achieve more efficient and positive outcomes for processes and workshops and meetings. So to achieve those outcomes, of course, it's very important to be clear on your objectives, both the overarching objective of the project and the objectives of each workshop and stage of the process. So when crafting an objective, think about the words you choose. Do they give a clear indication of the purpose, topic, and desired outcomes? I've selected some useful words categorized by purpose to support your workshop planning. And it's of course also useful and helpful to share or co-create the objectives with the workshop participants beforehand. And I look forward to talking about your objectives for your next workshops with you soon. When we have our calls, we'll also be able to speak further about how you found the different stages of your process. And these stages are not necessarily linear, but you can return to any of these points during the process. So just take some time to reflect on the points here at these 4 stages and whether you need any support or guidance or facilitation tools to cover any of these points again. I look forward to learning more about your previous workshop design and the outcomes. Before planning any workshops, I always find it helpful to consider a few things. So number 1 is the venue and space of the workshop, as this can really affect the participants' experience and sometimes your choice of facilitation methods. So think about whether you want to have tables, space for people to sit in a circle, or whether you need any technical equipment. And similarly, the number of participants and length of time will also affect some of the methods you choose for the workshop. As we previously discussed, the objectives need to be broken down into smaller objectives or questions that will guide your participants through a process to achieve the desired outcomes. And the final structure will really reflect on all these considerations. So the space, the participants, the time, the objectives, and therefore these will all inform what methods you select. So here's an example of a workshop plan that I use and prepare before every workshop I facilitate. So I start with estimating the timings for each session and outlining the process and objective for each and selecting what tools I think will be most appropriate to meet those objectives. And then once I've created a draft, I review it for the timings because you always need to be really realistic about those. And then the flow and experience of the participants, thinking about perhaps how the tools and methods follow after each other. Do they create energy? Do they maybe need a reflective break if the method or process is quite challenging, or do they just need a comfort break? And so thinking about those kinds of things are really important. And now onto the facilitation toolkit. So it's important to create the right balance between positivity and creativity that can energize and motivate your participants, but as well also considering space and time for reflection and open and honest sharing around sensitive or challenging topics. So as a facilitator, it's your role to be aware of this and select your methods accordingly, and also be prepared to manage any dynamics that may emerge during the workshop. So begin as you mean to go on. So every workshop needs a good beginning, which will obviously include a clear introduction from you, the facilitator, on the purpose and outline of the day. And then there's an opportunity to create connection amongst your participants, which will really help when they're working together. So I've just put together a few suggestions. So I really like a check-in. This is most effective done sitting in a circle without chairs, but you can also do it at tables. And just simply ask each person to state their name and answer a simple question. So it could be how are they feeling today, or it could be more specific to the process, and just be really clear that it has to be brief, because the purpose of this is just to hear everybody's voice so that everybody feels included, which is why a circle is very suitable because each person can see each other. And if you're really short on time, you can also even do it standing up. If you want to create a bit more energy in the room straight away, you could try a spectrum exercise where you get people to stand in a line and place themselves in response to a question. So for instance, how successful have you found this project so far? Very successful people stand to the left, less successful to the right, and then you can ask participants to speak from where they're standing and say why they've stood there. If you feel like stakeholders might need some time to be listened and heard, then a listening exercise in pairs is a great way to start a workshop. And you can give them 5 minutes, or if you feel that's a bit much, maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes to speak in answer to a question that you pose, and the listener listens in silence, and then they swap roles. You can also add an extra bit to this and give an opportunity for the listener to reflect back what they've heard from the speaker after they've spoken. And this is really useful if you feel that your stakeholders are perhaps feeling like they haven't been heard fully in the process at this stage. Another way that's fun to create some connection and energy and also encourage listening is to get participants to interview each other with questions that are provided, which then you can reflect back to the group what you've heard. If you really want to deepen participants' thinking quickly, then I always find a word association exercise very simple and very powerful. So just choose 2 words that have meaning for the project. My example here is power and knowledge, but you can choose any words that you feel are appropriate, and ask participants to list all the words that they associate with those 2 words in just 2 minutes. And then when they finish, they can discuss that with a partner or share it as a group and reflect on what meaning has emerged and how that relates to the project. If you're really short of time, consider sending out a pre-workshop survey and sharing the results at the beginning of the workshop and inviting feedback, and perhaps adjusting your agenda according to that feedback. Although I'm sure with the results of that survey, you would have planned the agenda accordingly. And the other way to create a very relaxed and open way to begin a workshop is to ask participants to draw a picture, either individually or in groups, that illustrates the current stage and state of the project, and reflect on these together. So I've put together 20 methods for you, but again, when we speak, we can explore other ideas or options that you may find more suitable. And there's also a further resource page at the end of this document. So tool number 1 is a World Cafe. I like this method a lot. It's a really efficient and focused way to gain input from a large group of people and think about whether it's enough to have a topic or theme per table or whether a how might we question might produce more useful insights. And don't forget that you need a nominated anchor for each table to take notes and summarize these when each new group comes around. Stakeholder analysis. I'm sure you've already identified your stakeholders, but if you haven't explored their experience from the perspective of their power and interest, then this can be a really useful exercise. Solution tree, again, is useful if you feel maybe that you're stuck in a problem or challenge, as it helps the group transform problems into goals or solutions. The timeline exercise is a really good reflective exercise, as it allows participants to reflect on the overview of their personal experience of the project, and can also be extended into the future to share goals, aspirations, and desired outcomes. I like to encourage creativity, first with drawing the line. It needs to represent their experience. They can also add drawings as well as. For the future part, I usually provide string and post-its and get participants to extend the line off the page and attach post-its for the notes. It can be fun to display their maps around the room and have people silently read them before having a reflective group discussion. SWOT analysis is a tried and tested technique, but always useful to determine strengths and areas for improvement and possible future challenges of the project. Role play can be a fun way to energize the group and get them to see and experience issues from the perspectives of other stakeholders. You will need to prepare some characters and scenarios, or you can also ask the group to write their own based on their experiences for other participants to role play. The 6 thinking hats is another classic facilitation method. You can present an idea or proposal for review from the group and ask participants to explore it from the different perspectives of the 6 hats and what they represent. Open space is really good for big groups, but it does require confident participants who have issues that they feel strongly about in order to generate meaningful and useful discussions. So be really wary with this one, because it does require less input and guidance from the facilitator. So it's not always successful. Pre-mortem is another way to explore risk before the project is implemented and helps create actions to lessen the likelihood of the risk happening. A democracy wall is always useful to have during any workshop, as it promotes inclusivity and allows for people who may feel less confident voicing to contribute their ideas. But it's also useful if you find that speakers or processes are interrupted with questions or challenges, as these can be redirected to the wall and then reviewed all together to save time. And it's useful to combine this with other facilitation methods. Prototyping can be a really fun way to add creativity and energy to a workshop. Working with our hands actually unlocks a different part of our brain and thinking, so I would always encourage having one exercise that includes making in your workshop. And tell participants it's not about the quality of what they produce, but how well it conveys an idea. A fishbowl, again, is good for large groups, particularly those with different perspectives. Be sure to remind participants of the need to listen to understand, not respond, and to notice any internal reactions to what is being said so that they may potentially uncover any assumptions or biases that they may have brought with them. And ideally, a fishbowl will broaden perspectives, create empathy, and allow participants to be seen and heard. The 5 whys is a useful exercise to dig deeper into a problem or challenge. Often we try to fix the symptom instead of understanding the root cause of a problem, so it likely requires a solution-focused exercise afterwards to avoid participants feeling disempowered or despondent if they have uncovered more or greater challenges in this exercise than they started with. Speed networking is a fun energizer and can be used to help participants reflect on the process or explore a specific question in a short period of time. Blue sky visioning is really about creating the better world we all want to live in. So this exercise really allows participants to explore what needs to happen in order for their desired change to occur. The heart, hand, and mind is a lovely exercise to connect the emotional, practical, and logical aspects of an idea. As successful outcomes will usually have all three, but it's very often that the emotional aspect is overlooked. But this is so important when we're thinking about behavior change, as we are really driven by our emotions and not our brains a lot of the time. So it's also lovely and good to start or end a workshop, or perhaps begin after a lunch break with a reflective check-in. So I like to provide a selection of images and printed values and ask participants to pick one of each. So they can either share how these reflect the stage of the project, or if you want, you can just leave it more open and simply ask them why they've picked that image and that value and what they mean to them. And this provides a really good way for participants to get to know each other better, and it can be really insightful. So who-do is a very practical exercise to plan who is involved in decision making and what they have to do to achieve the desired outcome. But also note that this can also involve people who might potentially block the outcome. So that is another way to uncover sort of potential challenges. 1, 2, 4, all is a really simple and quick exercise to generate ideas and responses on a question. And this also works really well in large groups. Why, what's stopping us, really helps to define the problem or challenge that you're facing and helps generate possible solutions and uncover barriers. So try and encourage participants to formulate the answers as how might we questions. For example, a why to the question, how might we increase income from investments in local food crops and fishery value chain development, could be how might we reduce non-communicable diseases. So here are some further useful resources for you to explore if you wish, and I look forward to speaking with you all soon. Thank you very much.